Ambient before. We are a collective of HVAC design companies, and we are now a national company, which includes a lot of brands you may have heard of, such as Gilbar, DMG, Johnson Barrow, Mechanical Technologies, and many more. If you'd like to get some more information, go to ambient-enterprises.com. And a couple of things about the call. You can enable your camera. You do not have to. It's not required. You can unmute and mute yourself to ask questions. Just make sure that you start off with your microphone muted to make sure that everyone else on the call can't hear you if you don't intend it. And if you have a question, just wait for a little pause there, and then Don will be happy to answer those. And then we'll also have, I'm sure, a pause at the end where you can put any questions either in writing or ask them with your microphone. If you do want to put questions in writing, just put them in the chat function, and then I will help Don towards the end there, read those questions, and we'll get those answered for you. So lastly, just make sure you are using your full name and your correct name when you're joining the call. So just make sure that your name matches your Ambient Academy account to make sure that if you do email me for a PDH certificate, that we have the right record for you. So without further ado, I just want to pass it off here to Don Weber of ClimateCraft.
Sounds good. Thanks, David. I'll take over the screen here. Started. All right. Everybody see my screen okay? Looks good?
Yep.
Okay, good deal. All right, so talking about custom air handlers today. So my name is Don Weber, as David mentioned. I'm a regional sales manager for ClimateCraft. A lot of my territory includes the Northeast with a lot of the ambient companies up this way. And then I also cover the South Central, including Texas, Arkansas, Kansas, and Oklahoma. So a little bit all over the place. I've been with ClimateCraft for a little over 2 years, been in the custom manufacturing side for HVAC for about 15, and spent 10 or 11 years with another custom manufacturer, actually in Michigan, where I'm based out of. ClimateCraft is based out of Oklahoma City, and we're a part of the Climate Control Group, which includes a few other companies you guys have probably heard of that are all based in OKC, IEC, Climate Master, and Climate Cool. And all the factories are within about a 5-mile radius of each other. So it's kind of nice for our organization because we have a lot of synergies as far as sharing resources with engineering and finance. And we have, a lot of different brand opportunities for us, especially for representatives that have all 4 brands. So kind of getting started within the agenda. As David mentioned, we'll leave a spot at the end for questions. But if you guys want to ask questions throughout the presentation, I'm definitely open to that, and it helps and make the conversation a little bit more engaging. So feel free to ask questions as needed when it comes in. But here's kind of the topics. We're just going to go over a brief why custom air handlers and some things that we offer, talk about some fan array technology and some other options that we have within that. And then we're going to talk about site-assembled replacement opportunities. For us, it's a product called Access. It's a fully palletized knockdown unit that's built in the field for the first time, rather than factory built, torn down, and brought into a space for replacements. So first part of the subject here is why are custom air handlers? Why do these jobs come up? For us at ClimateCraft, and for those that have dealt with custom projects and before, a lot of it is going to be based on higher criteria, longer life cycle of the product. So, for us, we really advertise a 40 to 50 year life product design. We do a lot of work with the University of Texas, and their spec around custom air handlers is written so the custom air handler is going to last 50 years. So, it's a lower total cost of ownership, less construction projects that cycle through that lifespan. And something that you're going to spend more upfront for sure, but it's over the life cycle of that product, it should be a savings over time. So, if you think about, like a semi-custom or a package unit, the lifespan is usually between 15 to 20 years. So over 40, 50 years, you might have to replace that equipment 2 or 3 times. For customers that we deal with, which is typically going to be in healthcare, like hospitals or institutional university work, when they have to shut down anything in a hospital or healthcare system, it usually costs them money. So that's another factor that goes into the decision of whether or not custom air handling is a good fit for them. Some other things, with high static, low leakage, custom applications, whether it's a footprint that you have to build around, maybe there's some columns, or it's a tight fit, and you can't get a package unit off the shelf to work. Custom exterior finishes, we have a lot of options there, and then different third-party standard testing as well, something that can come up for us. And so here kind of gives a little summary of some of the product offerings that we have. So we can do, indoor, outdoor units, energy recovery units with heat wheels or heat exchangers, heat pipe systems. With outdoor units, we can provide units with full mechanical vestibules for housing electrical and mechanical components to protect them from the elements. And then we do offer standalone replacement opportunities for just fans and coils. We build and assemble the fans in our factory, and the same thing with water coils. Then our site assembled AHU option, which is what we call access or knockdown. And I'll go into that product detail more in depth here a little bit later. And then some third-party standard that we've gone through. So for all of our water coils that we manufacture in-house are AHRI certified. And then we have some designs that are IBC seismic and OSHPD certified. So for those of you in California where that becomes a hot topic, especially in healthcare, we do have some designs that meet those requirements as well. We've done through the shaker table testing and all that fun stuff. So same thing with Miami-Dade. For those on the southeast part of the country, it's basically a high wind rating. And if you guys haven't seen how they do the testing for this, it's pretty cool. You should look it up on YouTube. They actually fling 2x4s at an air handler and see how it withstands. So traditionally this was built around Miami because of the hurricanes. But other parts of the country have used this as well. Working in Oklahoma, I've seen where some engineers will specify this as well, just because of tornadoes and the frequency of tornadoes, to be able to make sure that they could withstand some of those scenarios. And then we offer ETL, electrical certification, for our factory built units. So I consider ETL similar like a brand. They just make sure that everything that we build and ship is in accordance to UL 1995 standards electrically. And then we also have AMCA ratings on our fans as well. So I mentioned some custom exterior finishes here. Here's a few examples of some jobs that we've done in the past. So if you have a client or an architect that you're trying to meet the needs to look like the building on the outside, we can do custom finishing. So as long as you give us a paint chip or a color sample, we can get that matched with the powder coater that we use locally to the factory and match that on the job site. And then we can do just standard pre-coated panels as well, which is just what I call a custom gray. Some other things that you can think about too for aesthetics on the outside, if there needs to be a curtain wall or something hung on the outside to kind of hide the air handler from the street view. We've worked with different contractors to mount support systems on the outside so they could actually hang that from our unit if they need to. So there's some different options there. It's just some things to think about, but we definitely have all kinds of opportunities for colors there. All right, so testing, factory testing, it's another thing that's usually heavily specified in a custom air handler opportunity. So at ClimateCraft, we can do lots of different factory testing. Just one thing to note, for every ClimateCraft air handler that runs through the factory, whether it's specified or not, we are going to do a leakage test before that unit leaves the factory for any factory built unit. And that's just the quality assurance that we take to make sure that what we're producing is going to be holding up to any of the environments in the field. So I know there's not a lot of manufacturers out there that do that, but that's definitely something that we hang our hat on, especially in quality in the factory. And they have a little game going where they try to get as many units to pass in the first try as possible and see how long of a streak they can go. But for any specified or witness testing, we can accommodate that. So we can do pressure testing as far as leakage or deflection. Again, since I cover the state of Texas, we've done a lot of work with the University of Texas, and their testing requirements pretty strict. They want to see L over 250 at 10 inches on deflection and 1% at 10 inches for the leakage. So we have done, several units really this year and probably 20 to 30 in the last couple of years. So we have a lot of experience doing witness testing Our quality team is a great group of guys. We actually have a manufacturing engineer that runs that testing in that department. He does a good job. And then we can also do fan vibration testing. We can do airflow testing if needed, sound testing at the factory. So the only thing I like to highlight with the sound testing is that we do not have a sound accredited lab. So if that's a test you're looking for, that's not something we can offer in the factory. Just because it's a custom product and everything is, different in size, and we manufacture some large units, it's kind of hard for us to get that done. But we can do sound power testing at the factory. And the way that that works is we have a microphone that we can test sound power. Typically, we try to do that at the later part of the day in the shift for the factory, so it's not as noisy. Kind of when they're starting to clean the shop up for the day, and that helps eliminate some extra ambient noise. But that is an option that we can do at different intervals from openings of the unit. And again, I mentioned factory visits. So if you want to just even do a walk through the unit before it ships out or an inspection, we can help with that. And again, any witness testing or plant tours, reach out to your ClimateCraft rep, and we can help get that scheduled. We love to have people come to Oklahoma City and show them around and have a good time. So, all right. So, fan array technology, I'm going to talk a little bit about this here. So, really, you know, fan arrays is not a new topic, at least for the industry in the last 10 or 15 years. But traditionally there was a lot of systems that were on, one or two fan systems. So if that one fan went down, then, your whole air handler was down. So, fan arrays have become very useful to give us a little bit more redundancy. So, instead of one or two fans, maybe you have 6 to 8. One fan goes down, it's not the end of the world. You can still get pretty close to capacity depending on what you're designing to. And it's a little bit more uniform as far as airflow, again, because you're kind of spreading that air across the footprint of the fan section. The maintenance is a lot easier on these. You're not having to worry about tuning belts or replacing belts. Really just greasing the motors and making sure the fans are staying clean is kind of the biggest thing. And as far as retrofits, we do offer a lot of options for that. So fan arrays really kind of give you a little bit more flexibility in your design compared to the old belt-driven fans that a lot of manufacturers offered previously. I will say that a lot of the fan manufacturers even stopped manufacturing those fans. Green Neck in particular stopped making those. I think Twin City will still do it, but it's a very custom application, and pretty much everybody's moved to fan arrays. So with that being said, at ClimateCraft, we have what I'll call 3 different family of fans. So if you're looking at the left part of the slide here, our larger diameter fans are kind of our legacy product. The philosophy or design intent with that, it was to do fewer fans, but a more efficient system. But, as kind of mentioned, as the fan array topic kind of caught on to the industry, we moved to doing more small diameter fans. So the larger diameter fans we call our fan matrix, and then the smaller diameter fan arrays, which is really just grouped together based on wheel and motor size, we call our mini towers. So our mini towers are sized between 10 to 16-inch wheels. And, we've really tried to design this product to be able to fit through a doorway, especially for replacement opportunities, lighter weight, more compact, easy to maneuver through space. So this gives us a nice solution for that, as well as, giving us some redundancy as well. And then with ECM fans, we'll stock some ECM fans. I will say, probably for the last 2 or 3 years, everybody's really stayed away from ECM fans due to the lead time. They were out probably 50 to 60 weeks for a while there, and people kind of started to stray away from that. So I will say now we're getting lead times from manufacturers like Zalabag or EB and PAPS between 8 to 12 weeks on a lot of cases. So, if you have the right opportunity for an ECM fan, if you want to look at those type of design options, we can help you with that. I will say EC is not a solution for every opportunity, but it does offer some space savings as well, footprint wise. And speaking of that, if you go from left to right on the screen, left, you will have the most length in the unit that'll be taken up by the fan section, and going across to the right, you'll take up less. So, the name of the game and custom air handling is typically, trying to reduce the footprint as much as you can, but still have a decent design with the fans. So most of the time, I would say, and probably like 90% of the opportunities, we're starting with our mini towers, which are option in the middle of the screen. And that's really just to help have a more efficient length into the design and to save space. But if you use ECMs, we can take a little bit more out in the direction of airflow. So. And you can kind of see here, so this gives you a good idea of what our standard or our legacy product looked like compared to the compact mini tower. So definitely a good space saver, not only in length but in depth. And it gives us the opportunity to do N-1 or N+1 for all different kinds of ranges. Uh, I'll just say our definition of N-1, it might not be the same as everybody. So for us, N-1 is if you have, let's say, 8 fans in the system. One of those fans goes down, then the rest of the 7 fans can ramp up to be able to meet the design volume. And N+1 for us, if we had, let's just say 9 fans in the array, but only 8 were running. So basically you have a spare fan in the array. So our N-1 term and N+1 terms is defined that way. If you guys have questions on particular projects, though, don't feel bad about reaching out. And then at ClimateCraft, our fan array or fan tower approach is a little bit different than most other manufacturers. So you can kind of see here highlighted in the picture, it's definitely a heavily supported fan. So the posts that go down here are structural steel posts, and those are bolted down to the floor through the base steel. And then we have these C channels that are like kind of the horizontal supports here that support the fan. And the nice thing about this fan base here that supports the fan is it's always going to be 2 times the weight of the rotating parts, which is nice because it gives us a built-in inertia base without having to pour concrete in the field. So, any sound, resonance, frequency issues you're not going to have with our fans. And on top of that, we also spring isolate all of our fans. So each fan gets 2 1-inch spring isolators here on the bottom, and then we have a 1-inch thrust restraint here to go to the front and back motion. So we're heavily isolated fan. And I would say that's one of the most unique things about our fan array offerings, because most other custom air handler manufacturers aren't offering fan isolation in this, especially as a standard. They're building sheet metal cubes and mounting the fans inside of that. And they're typically hard mounting a lot of those to the floor. So you don't have the fan vibration isolation at the unit, which, if you cover that somewhere else in your building, that's okay. But for us, so we buy the wheels, the cones, and the motors all separately, and then we test and balance them, and we do vibration and balance testing in BV5. So which is great when it leaves the factory and they look all shiny and new, right, when it comes to site. But over time, that fan's going to get dirty. If you start to lag on your filter changeouts, it starts to collect a lot of grime and dirt. In some extreme cases, that can actually throw the fan out of balance. So if you don't have a way to isolate that fan, whether at the fan or somewhere supporting the unit, you're probably going to see some vibration that you don't necessarily want. So, something to think about when you're designing units. The other thing with our fans is we do have IBC certification for seismic strength on all of our fan arrays for the mini towers and the fan matrix towers. So one option that we offer with our fan is kind of shown here in this picture. It's called a fan removal winch. So this is an ulterior method to servicing a fan motor compared to a traditional beam and trolley system. And the nice thing about this is if I go back here, so every fan cell will have a bolt pattern over here in the corners. So you can actually take that winch and you can move it around to each different fan cell. So whether you have a supply and a return fan array system and an air handler, you could still just have one of these and move it across the unit however it needed to be. So it's an inexpensive option compared to a beam and a trolley. And the other nice feature about this is, typically if you have fans mounted from floor to ceiling with a beam and a trolley system, you don't always have that overhead room to be able to lift this motor up, since your trolley is going to be kind of closer to the ceiling here. But this gives you a little bit more headroom so you can kind of get that up and get that over. So as long as you get a cart inside the unit in the fan section, it's a really nice tool for maintenance. We've had a lot of success with repeat customers wanting this in their units because it's a really handy tool for the maintenance team to have. And this just kind of shows a little bit about the ECM fan. So for those, if you're not familiar with ECs at all, this eliminates the need for a VFD. It's got a built-in inverter. So you don't have to have an external VFD with this. So that's a nice feature. And then we can offer different control packages with our ECM fans. So the way that we provide ECs is we build a structural wall and then we face mount those to the structural wall, kind of what you're seeing the back view of this. But again, they do have some limitations on static. So anything above 6 or 7 inches, you're kind of starting to push the boundaries of them. The other thing to think about too, if you have UV lights in a system, this could be a potential for wearing down the plastic here with the UV lights, but it's kind of a case by case basis. If you guys have opportunities for that, we'd be happy to work through that solution. All right, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is a product that we have called Balance Stream. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why Balance Stream kind of came as an option for ClimateCraft. So one thing we talk about sometimes is fan surge. If any of you guys have ever witnessed fan surge, one of the things you're going to hear at first. But really it comes about because you're operating in the region of the fan where you start to get a little bit unstable. So it's usually when you're looking at turning down the fans below a certain percentage of the volume that the fan is rated for. I'll kind of show you a fan curve to kind of give you an idea of what that is. So kind of mentioned before, so fan surge, what happens, you'll hear the vibration. So if you ever heard or been in the same building or same room as a unit that's surging, you'll definitely hear it. Sometimes we'll get service calls with, they're not being able to meet the flow, and then we'll start asking questions about where they're operating at, and it's typically on the fan curve where you're not supposed to operate. So it's going to wear down the components. You're definitely going to get less efficient than what you designed for. So some things to stay out of surge, and again I'll show you a fan curve here, but one thing is unfortunate is that typically the more efficient fan you have is going to be closer to that fan surge line or that unstable region of the curve that you don't want to operate in. So what some people do, if they're too close to that, they'll select a less efficient fan to move further right of the curve. There's some technologies out there with controls that turn fans on and off, or there's some unloading technology, kind of like what you have with Balance Stream, that actually doesn't require any control manipulation. So for us, this is what the Balance Stream kind of looks like. And there's other products out there that are similar to this, but this is a purely mechanical system. So we have a disc, which is the red part in that animation that's moving back and forth, that's connected to a rod with a spring. And so we set the spring constant depending on the application. But basically, how it works is the fans are still ran on VFDs like a normal fan array system. But as you ramp up that VFD and ramp up the fan motor, let's just say for this particular example, ramping the fans up, the air pressure and the air velocity, that force starts to increase and pushes on that disc. And as you ramp that fan up, it overcomes the force of the spring that's going the other way, and it can give you a variable wheel width on the fly. So it can go from modulate from all the way open to, if a fan is not in operation, it'll actually shut off and act like a backdraft damper. So it's kind of a dual feature as far as that goes. It's a simple, but it's a very elegant design. It's purely mechanical, so you don't have to worry about tying into sequence of operations as far as controls. It's going to react to the system based on that air velocity or air pressure that's forced on that disc. So within our selection software, we can actually kind of show what this does on a fan curve. So here's a fan example that for a selection. In this particular example, you could only get to about 50% of airflow without going into surge here, which is that red area of the curve. And then in our software, when we add Balance Stream, you can kind of see that this red area now turns to blue. So really, you can operate almost down to about 10% without having to worry about surge. So it gives you a lot higher turn down. And there's a lot of applications that kind of come up for that we've seen. Any application really where you're going to have wide varying loads throughout the day. So like a lab is a great example of that, where they're running all out during the day, and then when everyone goes home, they're really just kind of worried about air changes. So same kind of idea with like casinos or theaters, cafeterias. Another example I like to bring up is projects that are done in phases. So let's just say there's a building that needs 100,000 CFM from its custom air handler. But first phase of the project, they're only, doing half the building, so they only need half the volume, let's say like 50,000 CFM. So you could design around balance stream, and right out the get, you could have that system designed for 100,000 CFM, but it would be able to turn down to 50,000 CFM with the fans. And then you wouldn't have to worry about turning fans on and off or worry about your fan selection. So it gives you a lot of flexibility as far as that goes. The other thing to think about too is energy savings. So we did a study with the University of Kentucky. You can kind of see these orange bar graphs down here, or for the air handlers and for the fan specifically. So we looked at this first taller bar right here was a fan selection based on normal fans, fan arrays with VFDs. And then we looked at selecting a slightly more efficient fan, and then also being able to turn that down based on the building needs for this particular example with balance stream. And again, still ran on VFDs, but you can kind of see here it was about 25% of the energy usage, depending on the month you're going across, but it's pretty consistent. And, for us in HVAC, a lot of our topics of discussion, especially early on in design, are all about energy savings. So, if you're an engineer or a designer out there, this could be a nice tool to have in your back pocket to be able to offer to your client or to the owner of some upfront savings with a pretty good ROI. And again, balance stream, it's purely mechanical. It's not a super expensive controls option that we have on for our fans. So it's a nice opportunity and kind of a little niche product for us. All right. So last thing I'm going to talk about is our site assembled or our knockdown access product. Kind of walk you through a little bit of what makes us successful in that. So ClimateCraft was one of the first manufacturers to come to the market with a truly, knockdown unit. So basically, we're not building this in the factory. We're creating all the wall panels, the roof panels, all the parts, and then we're creating them together and shipping it to site with some instructions, and then it's being built for the first time in the field by the contractor. So it's pretty cool because it's a custom air handler that's being put together in the field and not in a factory. But again, we've done this for a long time. Over the 25 plus years of doing a knockdown approach like this, we've learned a lot of lessons and gone through some things. So we've really tried to create a evolving product that we try to improve every year. So we've come to look at this as like an 8-step process. So for me, especially on the front side of the business, being on the sales side, the analyzing and planning design, up front during that cycle is really important. We always recommend to either the client or to our reps to go and look at the job site, whether it's with the engineer, the contractor, the owner, the maintenance team, whoever, and kind of walk that path of how they're going to get materials into the space and then all the way to the mechanical room or wherever the air handler is going. And that just kind of gives you a good idea of what your pinch points are going to be, what your largest opening is going to be to be able to fit material through. And then we plan and design the solution around that. So whether it's, the base frames that have to be split or the walls or the coils. And then we also, as far as the estimating phase, will give you an estimated amount of assembly hours. And that's just for the contractor to put the unit together. And on every proposal, we'll put that on our scopes. That will be by unit. So, we know what it takes to assemble the unit in our factory. So we pull those hours out of our quote, and then we put a factor on them because, obviously in the field, that's not going to be as efficient as it would be in the factory. And we'll give the contractor at least a decent idea what the estimated hours would be. And that's going to be plus or minus depending on the contractor and their familiarity with putting together knockdown air handlers. And logistics and shipping, I'll kind of show some examples of that, but we can actually custom create each project or each air handler. But logistically, we typically, if there's not a special request, we will ship all light components together. So for example, all the wall panels will be shipped on a pallet together or a couple pallets. Same thing with the roof panels. All the fans would be grouped together, all the coils. So eliminates a lot of the searching for parts on site, just to make it more efficient for the contractor. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that they have a good customer experience with putting this together. So they're, open to doing this type of solution again. Then the other thing with testing, these units are not factory built, so they're not factory tested. So, making sure that if you have an owner that wants these tested before they do startup, we can come to site and help you with that. Or if you want us to do it ourselves, we have a test cart that we can fly to the site and do it. But we have different options for on-site assistance that we can offer, just so we're, their contractors not stuck there by themselves. You might wonder why do these opportunities come up? So a lot of the time it's replacement. It's an older air handler that's, it's not very reliable, or they're spending a lot of money just to maintain it, to keep it up, or maybe they're not getting the performance that they once were. It could be a lot of different reasons, or maybe they need to move an air handler to some other space within the building. And, so a new unit is something that they're looking to replace the old one for. And when to use it. So I will say for us, probably 95% of the time, it's a replacement opportunity. So it's an older air handler that was either field built, or it was a mechanical room was built around it. So it's not feasible to knock down walls and really disrupt the flow of whatever business is going on there to bring in a new factory unit. And it's physically unrealistic. So in those cases, we'll provide an access option for that. There are some other opportunities for us that have come up, though, where rigging is an issue, and maybe they can't physically get a crane close enough, so they can't rig it on top of a roof. And then the other thing to think about too, and this is where we've been really successful, is to do a replacement without having to evacuate the building, especially in the healthcare field. If a hospital has to shut down a surgery suite, that's a lot of lost revenue for them. So being able to do one air handler at a time and be able to do it rather quickly is very important. And I'll walk through a case study that we did a little bit later in the presentation too. And then for places like New York City, sometimes it's not feasible to close down streets, or it gets really expensive to do that in rigging. So that's when we'll look at a knockdown opportunity. So the one thing that's unique about ClimateCraft is our paneling system, and that's really what makes it a better approach for us as far as being able to do a site assembled unit. I think we probably have one of the most unique panel designs in the industry. In my opinion, one of the major differentiators between custom manufacturer to manufacturer is really their means and methods of putting together their cabinet or their paneling system, and how their units go together. Because at the end of the day, we're all putting in fan coils and energy recovery equipment, all kinds of stuff, trying to fit it into small spaces or whatever the custom need is. But really, the differentiator, I think, is how they put their system together. So we have a frameless panel design. It's all bolted on the exterior, and we do not rely on caulking for our leakage rating. So I'll kind of just explain that real quickly here. So this is a cutaway of our panel. So we have a machine in our factory that's called the roll former, and we buy our steel and coils. And as that steel goes down the roll former, it actually will punch out these bolt hole patterns every 6 inches. So that's all done before it comes to the field. And then it also creates this hem type shape that you see here that helps with giving our panel our strength. And then the inner part of this paneling system, sheet metal part here, is just a simple sheet shape that's tied together with sheet metal screws. But what makes our panel unique is we have a thermal break gasket that sits in between these layers of metal. And how this works is, as you tighten these bolts on the outside, it actually squeezes that gasket to become almost completely airtight. So for us, we don't have to caulk all of our interior wall seams or exterior. And if you go into pretty much any other custom manufacturer, if you go look, especially inside or even outside of their unit, you're going to see their means and methods for supplying, a low leakage unit is by caulking these. And that can work. I worked for another manufacturer that we did that. I'll tell you, every time we were chasing leaks, though, whether it's factory test or in the field, usually this was the first place that we were looking at and trying to make sure that all the caulking was done correctly throughout the entire unit. It's a manual process when you're looking at doing that, and it's very time consuming. So we've eliminated that part of the finishing work for our panel system, which makes it nice. And that's, a reason why that we're really comfortable with being able to offer warranty and performance guarantees, even though we're not building the unit, because really we're just relying on the contractor to bolt our panels together. So within our paneling system, we have different kinds of options. We have a 2, 3, and a true 4-inch of foam. insulation option that's injected. We do all that at the factory. We also have a fiberglass option. You don't see that very much anymore in our industry, but we do have that if it's needed. And then for different finishing, I mentioned the custom colors earlier, but depending on the application, we can do galvanized. We have done a lot of stainless steel units, especially in the East Coast in Florida. So we have a lot of experience of doing all stainless units, and then we also have aluminum options as well, just again depending on the need or the requirement. So coastal environments, stainless steel is a good option for that. And then we also have a marine grade aluminum option as well within our aluminum packages. That's similar characteristics to stainless steel, but not quite as expensive and a little bit lighter. So if you haven't heard about that, have definitely reach out to us and we'll give you some information on it. But again, so there's no field disassembly for our units. It's built for the first time in the field, rather than being torn down and rebuilt. We have a lot of competitors that they have, loosely built knockdown units, which basically means they don't do the finishing caulking at the seams and a couple other things. But I always like to give the analogy, if you've ever built like a big dresser or something in your house or your apartment, and then you go to move and you got to take that down, it usually doesn't go together as nicely the second time as it did the first time. So kind of the same thought there, especially when you're looking at a big sheet metal box with a lot of screws and different framing, taking all that apart and then, reattaching it, it can't be easy to go back together. So I kind of just talked through some examples of some things to think about if you're looking at a knockdown or an access job and some things to look for. So this kind of just shows the space here of a unit that we built to knockdown. But some things to think about here. So, with your fans, a lot of the times, whatever your ingress is, it's typically going to either be a single door like this or a double door. So being able to make sure that you can maneuver that fan. Again, I mentioned we have these smaller product of family of fans. It's typically what we're going to use for access or knockdown. Then the other thing, your big bulky pieces of equipment like coils, do you have enough room to kind of swing that in through the hallway? Because a lot of times, you'll have a lay down area in front of a mechanical room. But to get in there, you got to get through a doorway into that hallway. So, do you have the room to swing that coil if it's the full width of the unit? Or maybe sometimes you got to split this into 2 or 3 coils while they be able to fit that in the space. So that's an option or solution we can work through. And for contractors, what kind of overheight room do they have? What do they need to disconnect to be able to install the new air handler, whether it's ductwork, piping, electrical, controls, fire protection, and making sure they're kind of working through those solutions as well. And then again, I mentioned testing. Again, we offer on-site services for any of our products, but especially for knockdown. If you want us to be there to supervise the build, especially if it's a larger job, we can help with that. We can bring our test cart, which you can kind of see in the upper left, and actually do the testing ourselves. So again, something to consider when you're looking at this through a holistic approach from start to finish. All right, so some other options that we have. So, when you're looking at a custom air handler, typically, our restrictions for shipping things down the road are height and width requirements to be able to ship them effectively. So, if we have a really large unit and we need to split the sections, or maybe the sections have to be split to be able to fit in the space, we're always going to be splitting across the length first. And typically, we do not want to split across the width for a factory built unit that's getting shipped down the road. But for access, we have a nice option that we can do that with our structural base. So our traditional base system is structural tube, and it's a really heavy duty, robust base. We have options from 5, 6, 8, 10, and 12 inches for structural and stainless steel. And then for all structural steel, we epoxy coat all the steel members and the paint booth at the factory. But for access, there's a lot of times where your base section is usually your most heavy or awkward piece to get into space. So sometimes you want to split it across the width of the unit as well. So when we do that, we can create a little access point here. So this allows you to be able to draw those sections together to make sure that they're level and plumb before you start installing the equipment, because it's a ground up type approach for us. So making sure that your base is level and set first is really the first step before you start doing any of the other install. taking that one step further with another base option that we have. So this is showing a panelized injected foam base. So this gives us more flexibility, not only in base height, we can do it in 1-inch increments, but also in splitting these sections up. So each one of these little rectangular pieces you can kind of see here is actually a base section. So normally with the structural steel base, you wouldn't want to do this. One, it would get very expensive. And two, it's a lot of extra work in the field as far as, especially if you want to weld that together. So this is a nice option. It's a little bit more lightweight. It's a more economical option for us. But again, it gives us more flexibility to be able to ship these in really small pieces. The one cool feature that we offer with this is each one of these rectangular sections here would come with its own leveling feet. So again, you could set this section down, make sure it's level, and then move on to the next section. The only thing to note, though, about this is, a lot of the time, especially in replacement, we're installing these units on older concrete pads that aren't perfectly level, right? So once you install and level these base sections out, you cannot move this base after it's been set. So, if you have to do some weird finagling, depending on what kind of space you have, maybe on the walls, and you need to slide the base around, this might not be the best option for you. But in a lot of cases with knockdown, this is a really good option. So we form all the C channels with sheet metal, and then we inject foam, kind of like our wall paneling system, to give it a lot of its strength too. All right, so I think one of the most important things of this whole sale or this whole process or product is really, how you put this together. Because I mean, again, it's a really robust industrial product, and it's getting put together in the field, right? And how can you do that effectively and still have, warranty from the factory? So one of another key differentiators for us is the assembly package that we sent. And the analogy for me is like it's an IKEA package on steroids, or if you've ever done any of those big Lego sets, they're kind of grouped with bags. You build one bag and you move on to the next one, then you start connecting them. Same kind of logical thought process. We group everything together. Everything is going to be labeled from the factory, and it's all going to be brought together on skids. So we have a couple different parts of our installation manual, and the first major part of this, which is usually about 150 to 200 pages, is a reference guide for putting the unit together. So no matter what the design is, you're still going to have to put wall panels together. You're still going to have corner posts. So a lot of the ClimateCraft build and feel and features are going to be designed and outlined in this instruction. So you can kind of see here's just a cutaway of one of the pages, but it gives you some nice pictures with some instructions. Again, so a lot of the material is going to be in this general installation manual, but we also have what I call a project specific part of this that we call our panel map. So I'm going to kind of just walk you through an example of what that means. So this is an access unit that we did, pretty basic here, just a mixing box, fan, filters, and coils. And this is what the drawing looked like that we got out of our software for selections. And then we can show this nice little 3D ISO view to show you what it looks like when it gets all put together. And we can take that a step further and actually show you an exploded view. So this kind of gives you a good visual representation of all the pieces and parts that you're going to have to work with. But we take that actually a step further and we create a panel map drawing. So this is one of two examples here. I'll just show you. So this first example, same unit as I showed previously. And this is outlining all the equipment. So the coils, the doors, the dampers, the air seals. So everything that comes from the factory is going to have a tag that matches this tag on the drawing. So this is a great map or guide for the contractor to use for installation. And we've seen a lot of them where they'll tape this up to the wall, and this is a big part of their instructions to put the unit together. And where this is really helpful here, in this example, this shows all the wall panels and the roof panels. Because you get a pallet of all these wall panels, they're all going to look pretty similar, right? I mean, yeah, you have some that have some openings put in, but besides the width of the panels, a lot of them are going to look the same. So this outlines every panel and where it should go in the build, and then the same thing with the roof panels on the top. So the cool thing, every single piece of equipment or part of the package is going to have a label. So this kind of just gives you an example of this. So this is a wall panel, so WPA09. is the label here, and that's going to correspond to the panel that goes right here in the build. So again, really specific instructions on what goes where for every piece and part, not just the equipment, but all the wall panels especially. And then the other thing to note on labeling, so it might be kind of hard to see in the picture, but here in the bases, we actually etch in the serial number and the section number on the outside of the base frame. So if you're standing in front of the unit, you'll be able to easily see what section it is and the serial number. This is really helpful too for units that have been in the field for a while. You know, sometimes those tags get worn out. But if you want some submittal information on a specific unit that's in the field, if you give us the serial number, we'll be able to look that up and get you that really quickly. So nice reference guide, especially for those looking at things or different units in the field. And then some things that come with these packages. So we can do some pre-assembly light packages. All the gasketing comes with the equipment. So, you know, the one thing with electrical that I'll just say here to note is all the conduit and wire is not supplied by the factory. So that's all done in the field. And then the main reason for that is because it's hard for us to guess at what the installing contractor is going to do as far as conduit and wiring. And, you know, most of the time they're going to have to buy a lot of the material on site anyway. So it's more efficient for them to be able to do that than for us to kind of guess and try to ship that in pieces and parts. Then as far as crating, you know, here's just some examples of what that will look like when it comes to the factory, give you a good visual idea. So this is just kind of showing equipment. You can kind of see the coils here. Here this shows the fans and how those get mounted and shipped out to site. And then all these are shipped on either a dedicated van or a soft top truck to be protected from the elements. And typically we don't shrink wrap these pallets. You know, if there's special scenarios, we'll look at that. But a lot of the time, you know, when we're providing this type of solution, it's the materials getting brought into either a shipping bay or they're getting brought into the job site right off the truck. So, you know, a few things to note here. You know, as far as flexibility goes, we don't have any limitation on anything that we can build in the factory can be built in the field. You know, and again, we still maintain a full warranty coverage even though we're not building this. And, you know, as far as like any support in the field, you know, even if we don't get hired to do some site supervision, we can also help over the phone or do some video calls through Teams or whatever the case is. So we offer a lot of support in that regard too. And then, you know, I mentioned the testing too. You're not going to have to worry about, is this thing going to pass? Because again, it's a tried and true paneling system, which is, you know, the biggest part of the build really. So flexibility, I'm just going to highlight that here. So here's an example of an air handler we did as access. You know, again, pretty basic. It was 14,000 CFM. You know, pretty easy design for custom air handling goes. We shipped this all in one truck, and we estimated it took about 125 hours to put it together in the field. And here's a nice counter example to that. So this is a job that I believe we did for a hospital in Minnesota. And you can kind of see here it's pretty, you know, it's about as custom as it gets for us as far as air handling goes. There's supply return fans, you know, kind of the weird economizer section down here, top and bottom tunnels, a full mechanical vestibule. So this was actually a rooftop unit. And the reason the customer actually elected to go access or knock down on this is because they couldn't get a crane close enough to the roof without taking too much of the parking lot of the hospital. So they elected to go down as access for this. So, you know, counter to the other example, this is a 150,000 CFM unit. We shipped it on 5 trucks and we estimated it took about 650 hours to assemble this in the field. Now, you know, a lot of the cases, if it's a contractor that's done a lot of access or knockdown work before, I'd say, you know, we don't mandate that our technicians are on site to help with the build. But for something like this, I would definitely say we would want to come and send our service techs to at least be able to help with the first, you know, week or two of the build. So speaking of that, we do have a contractor or installing training program. So it's really it's a 3-part process. So the first part is you know, if there's a contractor or even representative service techs that are interested in becoming certified installers, we invite them to the factory. Our service manager puts on some classroom setting training, and then they actually get to go out in the factory and get some hands-on training. So it's about a day and a half process for the first part. And again, what's nice is that our units are built in the factory the same way that they would be built in the field. It's a ground up approach, same thing. So they get a lot of hands-on thing and kind of work through a lot of questions or, any scenarios that they might run into. And, again, I mentioned support over the phone, but the contractor certification program is nice. The second part of that is basically we'll let the contractor, build the units in the field. We'll be there to help supervise. And then the third step would be they build one on their own without us there, and then we come through and inspect it, and everything goes through or go through those three process sets. Then they're a certified installer, and they can do that throughout the country. So pretty, contractors out there that are interested, talk to your local representative, and we'll help you get scheduled and set up for that. All right, so last thing I'm going to kind of just walk through again, just kind of give you a good visual and solution to a problem that came up for an access is a job that we did for radiology suite, and this was about a 33,000 CFM unit, and the big part is that they needed this to be up and running in 4 days. So they wanted to replace the existing unit starting on a Thursday with tearing that out, and then have the new unit up and running on a Monday. So it was a pretty quick turnaround for them. And again, they couldn't afford to be down very long to miss out on some of the revenue and appointments that they had set up for the radiology suite. So you can kind of see here, some of the things that we looked at was splitting coils, so to be able to fit the coils in through the space. But we helped the representative on this particular job work through a solution. So we gave them an estimated amount of time to assemble the units. And then they, formed how many team members they needed to do that. And they actually determined that to do this in the time frame they had, they needed to do this in 2 shifts. So we sent 2 service techs. One supervised the first shift, and the second one helped supervise the second shift. So, any situation like this where it's tight and you can't, afford to have any hiccups or, waiting on answers, I would say it's definitely good to have us come and help supervise the build. And then they actually also looked at some specific logistics and creating for this particular job for laydown. And I got a lot of pictures I'll kind of just help show you to give you a good visual idea of what this looked like. So ironically, they had a harder time removing the old air handler than they did bringing in the new one. So they had to tear off this window here that was on the floor of the mechanical room. You can kind of see the setup that they have. So this was the air handler that they replaced. You can kind of see what the room looked like. So the first stage was, removing all those components from the air handler, the little crane they had here, and taking that out. So, kind of how you're putting one in, they had to move it piece by piece. I think luckily for them, they had a decent doorway to work through, to remove equipment through. You can see they kind of took the doors off the hinges here, but it doesn't look like they had to do a lot of saw work to try to break components down. But there, you can kind of see here, just going through the unit from the front of the room to the back and removing all the equipment. And then they used a cart here to kind of roll that material out and keep moving it down. So again, kind of going from the front to back. And I believe this process took about a day to remove the old air handler. Kind of see here getting towards the end. So one thing that we provide with all of our submittals for knockdown jobs or access is a breakdown of the largest and the heavier pieces. So it gives you an idea of what you're going to have to work with, because, not only bringing it into space, physically, but also a lot of the times you're bringing these things in through elevators, and, what's your max weight that you can move throughout the space. So in this specific example, they brought all the material in through an elevator up to that floor. So it kind of gives you an idea of what that looked like. And again, kind of bringing things in on carts, bringing in all the material up on pallets. Here's all the coils that were created. One thing I like to highlight here is that, especially because they were in a tight window, I think they were pretty smart to put all these plywood sheets here on the walls, on the floors, to eliminate any, finishing work or retouching that they'd have to do on their way out. Help save some time. But they grouped all the panels together. Here's all the base frames. And again, this just kind of helps so you're not looking around searching for parts. I know 5 or 6 years ago, I built one of those playscape type things for my kids, a swing set in the backyard. And, getting a pallet of stuff can be overwhelming. And the first thing I was trying to do was try to sort things by like parts. I wasn't trying to search everywhere. So, same kind of thought process here is eliminate, the amount of foot traffic, make it a more efficient build for the contractor. You can kind of see here, here's how the fans came in on pallets. These fans had backdraft dampers on them. And then we actually do send all the hardware. So all the bolt screws that you're going to need to put these together, we send. We have a pretty good idea what it takes just due to the experience of building air handlers at the factory. So we'll send boxes of this hardware material in so that the contractor doesn't have to try to source that or figure out what they need to use locally. And then we also send some slotted rod tools that help the paneling system go together. So you can kind of see our service guy is showing how to use that. So we send these with the build, and they help make it easier for the units to draw together, so you're not fighting when you're bolting it together. And I'll show you that here in a little bit. And then with the gasketing system here, you can see here, this is an air seal that will go in between 2 panels. So the air seal or the block off wall, you need to put the gasket on. And then the nice thing about this is you can see here, all the holes are already pre-drilled, and it gives you a little bit of leeway for moving that in. And the way the gasketing system works is there's a double-sided tape that you attach to the top. You can kind of see that here. And then you're forming the gasket over top. And again, the nice thing about the gasketing, it's already pre-drilled. So, again, trying to make it easier for the contractor in the field to eliminate any drilling, so they really don't have to drill any holes in any of the paneling system assembly, which is nice. See them putting that on here. There's an example of a tag for the flooring. So now they're going to kind of try to get into the prep work here. I mentioned the panel map earlier. So again, this specific example, they taped all that to the wall. So this kind of was their instruction guide that they could reference, gives them a good view of what the air handler should look like, where all the components are, and where all the wall panels go, and all the equipment. So again, it's a ground up build. So you can kind of see here, they're putting the base sections together, and then there's a gasket on the top of the base that the floor or at the walls will screw down through the base. You can kind of see the holes there. So that's the attachment method. We don't have a framing system on the inside of the unit that you have to screw a bunch of sheet metal screws to. So after you have the base built up and square, then now is a good opportunity to start installing the equipment. So kind of just show you some pictures of that there. And then once all the equipment's installed, then generally you want to start doing the walls and the panels afterwards. And it just makes it a lot easier to be able to mount and move the equipment around, being, the fans, the coils, and all those heavy duty things. So you're not trying to lift over panels or maneuver around that. So typically all the equipment gets mounted first, and then you build the wall panels and the roof paneling system around that. You can kind of see here, they got the coils with connections on both sides. Getting all that installed. There's a drain pan. So here's the tools I was talking about a little bit earlier. So kind of see that they're using them here and here to be able to help make that easier to bolt all those bolt connections on the outside. So it's a lot of bolts on the outside, but it goes up quick, especially after the couple panels have been done. The team usually goes through these panels really quick once they get the hang of it. And then, tightening up all the panels, getting the corners done, got the doors installed, kind of putting some finishing touches on it here. And then, the last part of the build really is just getting all the mechanical and electrical connections done. So you can kind of see they're hooking up the ductwork here at the end of the unit, and then getting all the conduit and the wiring done, and then the mechanical work with all the plumbing, and have a completed unit. So this was it was a successful project for us. So they did meet the timeline. So it was about a 3-day process for them to be able to build the unit and then have it started and commissioned up by Monday, so the radiology suite could keep going. And that is the end of the presentation. So good time now. If you guys have questions, feel free. If there's any questions that I missed, we could talk about that too. See any in the chat.
Thanks very much, Don. If anyone has a question, you can unmute yourself and ask right now. You can also put it in the chat off to the right. I know we went about a minute or two over, so you guys are more than welcome to leave now if you don't have any questions, or if you want to stay on for any questions that you'd like to ask, you can go ahead and do that now. And if you don't, we'll probably leave this open for another 2 minutes or so. But again, if you have a question, just type it in the chat function, or you can also unmute your microphone.
Okay, for selection software, yes. So all of our representatives have access to it. If you don't have it, reach out to your regional. For external users or engineers that might be interested in using the software, we will do that on a case-by-case basis, but we don't open it up to everybody and anyone on the outside. But if there's an engineer out there that we work with a lot, sometimes we'll give them access. But generally speaking, it's mostly going to be external and representatives that have access to the selection software.
And again, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll leave this over for another 2 minutes or so. Syed, yes, this is being recorded. Typically, we edit these down and post them within 2 or 3 days to Ambient YouTube channel. And looks like we got a Q&A.
Okay.
All right. So Jim says, what are the max amps you can test for airflow?
That's a good question. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I'll get you an answer. I want to say it's around 100 or 150 horsepower.
Oh, sorry, I was muted there. Looks like Jack Lohr has a question, but we'll do Dave Belleville's first. Do you offer package controls?
Okay, so as far as controls goes, no, we do offer some kind of basic control panels for the ECM fan array, but that's pretty much it as far as us goes with controls.
Hey, Jack Lohr has a couple of questions based on your.
Yeah, the age-old question. It's not easy to answer. There's too many variables with custom. Compared to semi-custom, here's what I always tell, customers or reps. If you can make a solution work with a non-custom unit and that's what your budget allows, then, buy more, do that. I don't want you to go through a custom selection process and then there's not a budget for it. But, semi-custom, I would say, is probably going to be, depending on the opportunity, 20 to 50% higher. And, again, it depends on location, who the other manufacturer is. There's a lot of variables, and there's not a straightforward answer to that, unfortunately. Now, I will say, though, that the difference in price between a factory built and a site assembled unit is usually around 10 to 20% savings to do a knockdown unit. So, since we're not doing the assembly or any electrical work, there's a savings there for us. Just depending on what you're comparing against as far as space splits or unit splits.
All right. Again, we'll don't have any more questions right now. Oh, here we go. Can you factory test KD units?
Generally speaking, no. So typically with all of our knockdown units, they're all going to be built in the field. I know we've done it in the past, but I would say generally we try to stray away from it. It gets pretty expensive for us to build it up and take it down and do the testing, but I know we have done it on a couple of occasions. Well, the factory, in some cases we can. I was just down in Houston last week and we did that for a particular job. So it kind of just makes sense if you're a representative and you're interested in that, just reach out to your regional. If I'm your regional, reach out to me and we can talk through that.
Okay. We do not have any more questions right now, but again, we'll leave this open for another minute or so. What are your lead times for fan arrays, mini towers?
For just a fan replacement, it's usually between 4 to 6 weeks, just depending on how quickly we can get the wheels and the motors. Overall, for air handler lead times, we're anywhere between, I would say, like 8 to 14 weeks. So if you guys have a date, you need something on site, I can work with you to kind of work backwards to see if we can make that work. I recently just sold a project for University of Texas that we did a 5-week lead time. Now we didn't do any electrical work for that, but they needed a temporary unit that they're going to end up repurposing for a full-time unit in the future. But we helped work with our representative down there to do that. So, I'll say the one thing about working with ClimateCraft is we try to work with you as best we can on lead times and try to get things out as quick as possible. So if you guys have something specific that you need, feel free to reach out to us and we'll help come up with a solution.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And Dawn, thanks again. If anybody has any more questions, we'll leave this on for another minute or so.